Just to follow up on my rant about how last night I sat there with my mouth open in horror as I watched Donald Trump present phony made-up statistics as if they were true and tell lies about our president and our former Secretary of State, our current Democratic presidential candidate, as if they were true, without basically any pushback from any place. And it just blew my mind. Franklin Roosevelt talked about this, and this was in the context, oddly enough, this is FDR's famous FALA speech, F-A-L-A, and he was talking about how the Republicans were trying to blame him for the Great Depression. Now, you'll recall the Great Depression came about because in the election of 1920, Warren Harding campaigned. At that point, the top tax rate was 91%, and there was some consequential regulation of business, particularly of banks. The great crash of 1907, the stock market dropped 50%. And if Morgan and a bunch of his very, very wealthy buddies hadn't jumped in and started buying stocks, it would have gone beyond that. It would have gone lower than that. They basically saved it. Or saved us. And although there was a 2 or 3 year serious, depression/recession, 1907, 1908, 1909. And so in 1920, by 1920, things were well regulated, or at least they were getting there. And the top tax rate was 91%. And Warren Harding ran on the campaign of the slogan was less government in business, more business in government. In other words, less regulation, more privatization. And that, of course, and he became president. He won as a Republican in 1920. He became president of the United States in 1921. He was followed by Calvin Coolidge, who was followed by Herbert Hoover. Three consecutive Republican presidents from 1921 to the crash of 1929. I mean, all the way up to 1933 when FDR was sworn into office in March of 33. But it was those Republican policies. The first thing Harding did was drop the top tax rate down to 25% and deregulate Wall Street. And it set off what appeared to be a boom. It was actually a bubble. And so anyhow, in the 30s, FDR the Republicans were accusing the Democrats of having caused the Great Depression. And FDR pushed back, and here's what he had to say, which is the equivalent, I would say, of Donald Trump saying that Hillary Clinton is in favor of open borders and, unlimited immigration. Anybody can come into the United States, which is a lie. It's just quite simply a lie. And here's how FDR pushed back.
Foreign. They have imported the propaganda technique invented by the dictators abroad. Remember, a number of years ago, there was a book, Mein Kampf, written by Hitler himself. The technique was all set out in Hitler's book, and it was copied by the aggressors of Italy and Japan. According to that technique, you should never use a small falsehood, always a big one, for its very fantastic nature would make it more credible. If only you keep repeating it over and over and over again.
Bingo, right? And are we seeing this right now? Yes.
Well, let's take some simple illustrations that come to mind. For example, although I rubbed my eyes when I read it, we have been told that it was not a Republican depression, but a Democratic depression from which this nation was saved in 1933. That this administration, this one, today, is responsible for all the suffering and misery that the history books and the American people have always thought had been brought about during the 12 ill-fated years when the Republican Party was in power.
He's just laying out the history here. He's just telling the truth.
Now, there's an old and somewhat lugubrious adage which says, never speak of a rope in the house of a man who's been hanged. In the same way, if I were a Republican leader speaking to a mixed audience, the last word in the whole dictionary that I would think of using is that word depression.
Or for that matter, amnesty. After all, who did that? Ronald Reagan. Interesting.
You know that they pop up all the time.
So that's FDR. Propaganda techniques of the Nazis being used by the Republicans. FDR broke Godwin's law. I am perfectly willing to break Godwin's law. What we are seeing right now is the big lie technique, and it is being employed by not only the Republican Party with things like, oh, there's voter fraud all over the country. There's people who aren't even citizens who are coming in busloads to vote. It's a lie. It's a big lie. It's being repeated often, and it's being used to create legislation in over 30 states to knock millions of people of color off the voting rolls.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And it's being used by Donald Trump in his attacks on Hillary Clinton, his attacks on the Democratic Party, his attacks on the United States of America. This is really something to be concerned about.